The history of salt might not sound like the most exciting topic in the universe. After all, it may seem like salt has always been there for us, right? A humble white crystal sitting on our dining tables, often taken for granted. But what if I told you that this common mineral might just be responsible for civilization as we know it? The value of salt was so high at one point that it was sometimes used as a form of currency. In fact, the word salary comes from the Latin word for salt money, salarium, referring to payments made to Roman soldiers, either for purchasing salt or as a salt allowance. The act of using salt has been enhancing flavors and shaping human societies for thousands of years, from the New Stone Age all the way to the current TikTok generation. Now get ready, because we're about to get salty with the history of salt. And trust me, this season tale is anything but bland. The early importance of salt. But before we dive into the details of how salt shaped history, you might be wondering, sure, salt's been around forever, so why does it matter? Well, that's because salt is more than just a flavor-enhancing mineral. It's been the cornerstone of human development. When we look at the locations of early human settlements, a clear pattern emerges. They were consistently near both freshwater and salt sources. Take Jericho, for example, one of the oldest known cities in the world. Established around 8000 BCE, it was located near the Dead Sea, a body of water so salty that its beaches are made of salt. Coincidence? I think not. Then there's Çatalhöyük in modern-day Turkey, also constructed next to a salt lake, where we see some of the earliest examples of organized salt production. And let's not forget Solnitsada in present-day Bulgaria, the first settlement in continental Europe. Its name literally means salt works. Now, let's shift back to the beginning, to when salt originated, the mysterious origin of salt. Well, we actually don't know when salt was first discovered, since it predates recorded history. Sorry for the letdown. However, evidence suggests that humans across Europe and Asia have been using salt for more than 10,000 years. It's also unclear when humanity transitioned from simply licking salty rocks to actively producing salt, but we do know it was certainly being made by 6000 BC during the Neolithic era. That's roughly 8,000 years ago. One of the earliest known salt productions began in Jiqi, also known as Yuncheng Salt Lake, in Shaanxi, China. People from this region produce salt by boiling brine from salt lakes and springs in clay pots, leaving behind crystals of pure sodium chloride. By around 6,000 years ago, salt production had spread to various regions, from the coastlines and the Dead Sea in the Jordan Rift Valley to the salt mines of Austria and other areas of China. So much diversity, right? Next, we'll jump into the worldwide spread of salt production and uncover the different array of techniques that made salt a true global staple. The global spread of salt production. By around 4000 BCE, salt production had become a widespread practice across the ancient world. Along coastlines, people were boiling seawater or letting it evaporate in the sun to obtain salt, whereas in regions like the Dead Sea and Jordan Rift Valley, the high salinity of the water allowed for salt to be harvested directly from the surface or surrounding salt flats. But salt production wasn't just confined to coastal regions or regions like the Dead Sea. In the Hallstatt region of Austria, ancient societies pioneered deep mining techniques to extract rock salt. They dug extensive shafts, reaching depths of up to 200 meters, to access valuable salt deposits buried underground. This method of salt mining was crucial for communities far from the coast, where natural salt sources were scarce. Meanwhile, in China's Sichuan province, early salt production, which dates back to at least the first millennium BCE, involved boiling brine from salt-rich springs. Over time, wells were dug to access deeper underground brine, and advanced drilling methods were developed to extract brine from deeper layers, a method that became more advanced during the Han Dynasty. This technique not only facilitated efficient salt extraction, but also led to the development of cultural exchange, as salt became a highly valued commodity. These diverse methods of salt extraction, whether through evaporation, direct harvesting, mining, or boiling, highlight the mineral's pivotal role in ancient societies. But salt wasn't just a kitchen staple. It was a driving force behind early trade and economic development. In the upcoming exploration, we'll delve into how this precious resource had many challenges but still captivated global interest and fueled the rise of ancient economies. The beginning of the salt trade. For nearly 9,000 years after agriculture began, People lived in small, scattered communities, far from the organized civilizations we recognize today. However, by around 3000 BC, things started to change, marking the beginning of significant trade and currency exchange. During this period, salt became one of the most prized commodities. Yet, its trade was not as simple as one might think. For starters, salt was scarce. Even coastal towns where salt was easier to obtain could only produce so much. Boiling or evaporating a kilogram of seawater yields just about 2 tablespoons of salt. To gather a single cubic meter of salt, you would need to process, at the minimum, a staggering amount of 64,000 kilograms of seawater. Moreover, salt is a mineral, meaning it's an inorganic substance that occurs naturally. It's not like other seasonings that can be easily dried and packaged. It's also very heavy, which adds to its complexity of being transported on camels or horseback. A cubic meter of salt weighs around 2 metric tons, which is about 4,700 pounds. That's equivalent to the load of at least 30 horses. This scarcity and heavy weight made salt incredibly treasured, yet also expensive. But that didn't slow down the popular demand for salt. Instead, it rose with early Chinese kingdoms who traded salt with each other and their neighboring states. It also led the Celts to play a prime role in the salt trade as they built an empire around the riches from their salt mines in what is now Salzburg, Austria. Up next, we'll reveal the intriguing facets of how salt was transported across ancient civilizations. Salt trade route. Moving on to one of the most fascinating aspects of the salt trade, the extensive network of salt roads that crisscross the ancient world. Let's begin with the Romans because, boy, did they love their salt roads. The most renowned of these was the Via Salaria, or the Salt Road. This ancient highway stretched from Rome all the way to the Adriatic coast, covering about 242 kilometers. Initially built by the Sabines and later paved by the Romans, it was the superhighway of its time, facilitating the transport of salt from the coast to the capital and beyond. But the Via Salaria wasn't the only critical route. The Romans developed an entire network of salt roads. There was the Via Aurelia, which connected Rome to Pisa and transported salt from the Tyrrhenian Sea. Also, let's not forget the Via Flaminia, which brought salt from the Adriatic to the heart of the empire. Heading north, we encounter the salt roads of the Alps. These treacherous mountain paths were the vital lifelines for landlocked communities. The Salzstraßen, or salt streets of Austria and Germany, were especially crucial, with salt from the mines in Hallstatt and Hallein being transported over the Alps to Italy and other parts of Europe. One of the most notable routes was the Goldener Steig, or Golden Path, running from Passau on the Danube through the Bohemian forest. This route was so valuable that it was said to be paved with gold, hence earning its legendary name. But if you think hauling salt over the Alps was tough, imagine transporting it across the Sahara. The salt trade in Africa was epic in scale. Enormous caravans, sometimes numbering up to 40,000 camels, would trek across the desert carrying salt from the great mines of the Sahara. The most famous of these routes linked the salt mines of Tagahaza in the Sahara to Timbuktu. This journey could take up to 20 days, crossing some of the most inhospitable terrain on Earth. But the reward was worth it. Salt in Timbuktu was literally worth its weight in gold. Now, we can't discuss ancient trade routes without mentioning the granddaddy of them all, the Silk Road. While it's famous for silk, obviously, salt was also a key commodity on this vast network of routes connecting East Asia to the Mediterranean world. Chinese salt, particularly from Sichuan province, traveled westward, while salt from Central Asia moved east. The city of Dunhuang, at the edge of the Taklamakan Desert, became a major salt trading hub, where merchants stocked before tackling the harsh desert crossing. Fast forward to medieval Europe, and we see the rise of the Hanseatic League, a commercial and defensive confederation of merchant guilds and market towns. With salt being one of their main commodities, they established a complex network of trade routes across northern Europe, and the city of Lüneburg in northern Germany was particularly important within this network. Its salt, often referred to as white gold, was shipped along the Elbe River to Lübeck and distributed across the Baltic and North Seas. As we continue, we'll explore how these intricate trade networks flourished, profoundly impacting the rise of great empires across the globe. The rise of empires. Let's zoom in on how salt's value soared through the ages, shaping the fortunes of ancient communities across Africa, Asia, and Europe. Following the era of Egyptian ships that transported salted fish, salt's impact deepened as it became a pillar of wealth and power for various empires. While earlier trade had centered on luxury items like gold and saffron, salt grew to be a fundamental force in commerce, integral to daily life and national economies. The demand for salt was insatiable, and many cultures rose to meet it, leveraging salt to bolster their wealth and power. China. By 119 BC, the Chinese had nationalized salt production, establishing a state monopoly that not only controlled the salt trade, but also funded monumental projects like the Great Wall. India. During the Mauryan Empire, India implemented its own salt monopoly, a practice that persisted for nearly 1,000 years through the Gupta dynasty. This control over salt was a significant source of revenue for the empire. Macedonia. Under Alexander the Great, the Macedonians capitalized on their discovery of salt deposits in what is now Pakistan. These deposits, used by ancient Indus Valley civilizations, are still mined today as Himalayan rock salt. The Celts, who were later known as the Gauls, derived from the Latin word hal, meaning underground salt, gained immense wealth from their salt trade. This legacy is evident in historical sites like Hallstatt in Austria, Halych in Ukraine, and Galicia in northwest Spain. West Africa. In the Mali Empire, salt was so imperative that the city of Taghaza was not only financed by salt, but built entirely from salt structures. Among all these empires, ancient Rome perhaps best exemplifies the profound impact of salt. The Roman Empire's prosperity was intricately tied to the salt trade, a relationship captured by Pliny the Elder, who famously declared in his work of natural histories, "By Hercules, then life cannot be lived humanely without salt. It is such an essential substance that its name is transferred to powerful mental pleasures too. All the charm and greatest humor of life, along with rest from work, are called salts. It rests on this more than any other." Finally, we'll look into how salt, once a prized commodity, continues to influence our lives in the present day, where its role has shifted from essential to ubiquitous. Salt in the modern world. Now you might be thinking, that's all ancient history, but what about salt today? Well, even though its role as a commodity has lessened in the modern era, salt remains an essential part of our lives. Since the Industrial Revolution, which began in the 18th century, salt has been used beyond food, including the production of chemicals like chlorine and soda ash. This expanded its significance in industries like textiles, paper, and glass. Today, salt is still vital, not only for consumption, but also in key industries like water treatment, road de-icing, and manufacturing. Yet over the past century, salt consumption has become a significant health concern. Excessive intake is linked to conditions like hypertension, leading to ongoing global efforts to reduce salt in diets and promote healthier eating habits. Before you go, here's a fun challenge. Can you guess how many times we said salt in this video? Drop your guess in the comments below and let's see who gets it right. Also, don't forget to watch the other videos on our channel.